Hey everybody, what is going on? Welcome to another video. We're going to be talking about how to texture the foliage and the pages. So to start out, you can see that I have the normal map pulled up from the foliage. And the reason I do is because, we don't have an actual high poly mesh and a low poly mesh that we can really bake from. So, our options are kind of limited right now. Now, that's not to say you can't bake those, because we certainly could. We could actually just take the high poly mesh and we could probably just bake it onto a plane if we wanted to. And we could probably just get, the ambient occlusion, the curvature map all baked out. But realistically, in my opinion, I don't think we really need to go that far as to, make an AO map. I will probably want to use a curvature map, and that's why we're actually in Photoshop. So I'm going to teach you a manual way how we can go about doing that. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and double click the background layer, and we're just going to turn that into an editable layer. Okay, now we're going to create two separate empty layers, and then back to this normal map layer. If we go ahead and go into our channels, and let's go ahead and take the green map, and we're going to copy that and we're going to paste it into layer 1, and then we can minimize, and let's go back and we'll grab the red channel now. Okay, so on the top we have red, so I can label that as such, and the bottom green. Okay, so we're basically going to be combining both of these maps to get the edges, because you can see how we have sort of this black line on all of this. We have this white line here, so we got to utilize these maps in order to try to get a curvature map out of them. So we're going to go to Filter, Stylize, and Emboss. Now, one thing to keep in mind is, you remember how we inverted the green channel on our foliage because of the normal map? So just keep that in mind. That's going to be our sort of DirectX method. So you'll see what I mean by that in just a moment. So with our red channel, so we can go ahead and make sure that our angle is set to 0, and the height is basically, how much of the actual edges and curvature do you want to have stick out. So I don't want a whole lot. I think anywhere between 3 to 5 is probably going to be enough. I usually like to go on the lower side, so that'll work for us. Now we can go ahead and hide this for a moment. So if we go to our green channel and we go up to Filter, Stylize, Emboss, so because we flipped our green channel, our angle is going to be -90. Now, if we did not flip our green channel, it would just be 90, because the reverse of that would be showing the light coming from a different direction. So I'm going to go ahead and set that to -90, the height to 3, and I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. So now that we have both of these channels embossed, what we can do is go ahead and go to our red channel, and let's set the blend mode to overlay. And now, as you can see, this probably looks a little familiar to you. Now we have our own custom curvature map. So this is something that's really useful if for whatever reason you don't have the ability to bake out a curvature map for whatever reason. I feel like I've ran into this issue multiple times as I've progressed in my career. So this is just a really useful way to get your custom curvature map. So I'm going to go ahead and save that out. Okay, so I'm just going to call this Foliage Curvature 01, and I'm going to hit Save. And we can just leave it at 24-bit for now. Now, the next thing that we could definitely do would be to create an ID map, because we're probably going to want to texture each of these elements a little bit different from one another. So I'm basically just going to go through and select each sort of foliage piece, and then I'm going to go ahead and just kind of fill that in with a different color. So I think the fastest way to do something like that is to go ahead and hide these two layers. Let's go ahead and create a new layer, new empty layer, and then I'm going to go through and I'm going to select this normal map color here, and we could probably change our tolerance to be maybe something like 15, and that way it's basically just going to select the background. And I can see that there's maybe just like a little bit of areas where it's not coming through all the way because these colors are just too close to one another. So we could probably try to mess with the tolerance a little bit more. And what we could always do at the end of the day is we can go ahead and just grab our lasso tool. And we can just go ahead and make some selections here and just kind of anything that we need to fill in, we can just kind of lasso over. Okay, so it's just a couple of things, so not a big deal. All right, so now what we can go ahead and do is in this new layer we created, we can just kind of go through, and when I create custom ID maps, I just use the most bright color I can, and I try to use really diverse colors. So I'll use like reds, blues, yellow, just kind of using like the very obvious colors. So let's go ahead and invert this map by just hitting Control-Shift-I. And now I'm just going to go through and I'm just going to kind of just fill this in, make my opacity up all the way. I'm just going to go through and fill this. Okay, so now that all of these colors are all nice and filled in, and they're all pretty contrasty and different from one another, we can actually go ahead and just create a new empty layer at the bottom of that. And we could just fill it in with something like white for now. Okay, so now that we have this, we can go and save this out. Okay, just call this Foliage ID. And we'll just stick with 24-bit. Okay, so now we have all of that sort of prepped and ready to go. Okay, so now we are back inside of Substance Painter. What we can go ahead and do is we can go ahead and just select which mesh we're going to use. For this, we're just going to be using our base plane. So it can be any size plane, it does not matter whatsoever. So I'm just going to use a 4x4 meter plane. And as far as importing the different maps, let's go ahead and import some of the maps that we've already done. Okay, so we'll just select curvature, diffuse, foliage ID, and the normal, and we'll hit OK. Okay, so now we just have our blank plane right here. So I'm going to go ahead and label this as our foliage, maybe just foliage A. Okay, so next what we can do is let's go ahead and just scroll down to where we have our input maps, and let's go ahead and input our normal map. And we'll do our ID map, curvature, and our diffuse map doesn't really matter, the one that we created before. I know I just imported that, but we don't actually have to use that. That was just more of like a test for us just to get some color straight into Maya. So now you can see that this is going to be basically the plane on which we texture. Now, I will say we really don't have to do a whole lot as far as the texturing goes, just because the foliage is a little bit smaller, and we will be able to get a decent amount of detail in here, but they are foliage and they are leaves after all, so we don't really have to do a whole lot to them. So just keep that in mind. So let's just go ahead and start by creating a folder, and let's just call this leaf_01. Okay, so now let's go ahead and just create a black mask. And let's right click in here, and actually let's do add mask with color selection. So this is where our ID map is going to be really useful. Since we have already included it here, you'll see that our color selection, our ID map just popped up down here. So now if you go ahead and pick a color, it will pop up, and we can just go ahead and say, let's go ahead and make this, our first leaf will be down here. So nothing's changed yet because we don't have any sort of materials under there. So let's go ahead and add a fill layer. And let's drop it into our folder here. And let's go ahead and just start to change the color. We'll make it like a green color. And of course, let's go ahead and change our roughness value and drop that down just a little bit. Okay, something like that works. I could probably just try to color pick real quick and see if I get anything drastic. So maybe something like this. I want to do a little bit more like a yellow-green, maybe not something so saturated. I think something like that should work pretty well for us. So I'm going to go ahead and create a whole bunch of new folders that have all of the different types of foliage in them. And then we can go ahead, just like in the last video, and just kind of work on one leaf at a time. All right, so now that we have everything all nice and organized in their specific folders, we can go ahead and start to take a look at our first leaf here. So the first thing that we could probably do is we can start to add that curvature map, because again, there's probably not a whole lot that we could do as far as like utilizing a lot of maps, and that's okay because we don't really need to utilize them right now. So let's just go ahead and we'll duplicate this and just call this edges. And I'm going to right click and create a black mask. And I'm going to go ahead and just create a generator. And let's go ahead and just do a curvature. And let's go ahead and maybe we can change the color up just a little bit. Okay, and the fun thing about these leaves is that we can kind of just play around with the colors a little bit more, so they don't have to be like super true to what the actual leaf is. I think that adding in some color variety is going to be a lot of fun. Okay, so let's go ahead and just look at some of these settings in here. And just kind of sharpen up some of the curvature. So even something like that I think could work pretty well. We could also play around with the roughness, maybe make it a little bit more rough. Yeah, even something like that I think could work. So let's just kind of bring this color down just a little bit. We don't want it to be super contrasty. Okay, and next let's just go ahead and let's duplicate this base layer again. And we can just call this color a 1. And let's make a black mask. And this time let's add a fill layer. Go into our procedural textures here. And this is kind of where it could be fun to start to experiment around with different patterns and like slight color adjustments. I think that's always, it could be a fun idea. Okay, so we could just kind of select maybe sort of a grungy pattern. Could do actually even something like this, kind of psychedelic. Let's see if that works for us. And we can just change the color. And let's see, we could probably go a little bit darker. Maybe not too dark. Let's maybe go change the leaf color just a little bit. And let's just kind of decrease that a little bit more. So, I mean, you can see it's a really cool way to add in just some sort of fun little elements that maybe you wouldn't have even thought of before. Now, I should mention we don't want to go too overboard with this kind of method because, again, with all the leaves being duplicated around, obvious patterns are going to be, well, very obvious once you start to see them duplicated around a lot. So just bear that in mind, that that's something you want to kind of keep your eye out on for. Okay, so I think that's pretty much what I would do as far as pushing this one. Let's just kind of do all the other leaves and kind of get a first pass with these. So I think a quick way we could kind of do this fairly quickly is we could just grab both of these layers and we could duplicate them. And let's go ahead and just drag and drop them into leaf 02. Notice I didn't drag the base layer because I do want the base layer on all of these leaves to be just slightly different from one another. So maybe we could go right off the bat and just kind of change this pattern, and we could probably change it to something a little bit different. Could do like this grunge plaster. That could be kind of fun. And let's just kind of change the balance around. Maybe the contrast. Something like that could be kind of cool. And let's just go ahead and change the color of this. Maybe something a little warmer. Even something like that I think could be cool. We want to be fairly consistent, so when you squint at these, they all look relatively the same. Okay, and then last, let's just go ahead and change the edge color. We could probably make it maybe a different kind of color. Potentially something like that. I think that could work. Now, moving right along, let's go ahead and just work on the rest of these leaves here. Okay, so for the grass, we could probably try to do maybe something a little bit different than using kind of a, a grunge texture. We could try using something like a gradient. So we'll give that a whirl. So let's just go ahead and we're going to duplicate over this fill layer. Okay, we're just going to call this color gradient. Okay, so let's just go ahead and put this scale back to 1. And let's just go ahead and drag this gradient in here. And I'm going to use a color that's quite a bit different, a little bit more contrasted. We can kind of see what this map is doing by holding Alt. So it's kind of going over the entire thing. So we could probably just try to tweak the balance just a little bit if we can. This may not work out how I thought it would, but that's okay. Just go through and look at this linear gradient again. There we go. Just how to tweak the settings just a little bit. So I'm going to make the bottom of the grass a little bit darker. Something like that. And then we can go ahead and go back to our gradient and let's just kind of look at the contrast again. There we go, something like that works for us. I don't want to go too contrasted. So I think just having a slight gradient like that is that's really nice. I think we can just kind of utilize that. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the mushroom. So again, we can duplicate this fill layer, call this edges, and we're just going to create a curvature map yet again. We could probably do something like maybe a little bit more of a reddish color for the edges, or maybe brown. Actually, something like this, a little darker color, that kind of works. Kind of makes it pop a little more. Then it gets the little little holes that we made in there. So it's kind of cool. I don't really want to do too much more to the mushrooms because I think that they don't really need too much. Again, this process of doing what we're doing now, like some foliage, it does, you can, work a lot and get a lot of cool texture variations with this. But you'll see, I mean, in a lot of stylized games, I'd say in almost every stylized game that I've ever seen or played, they just have really, really simple foliage because that's not, the whole point is just to let the players know that there is foliage here. And, trying to go about it, not making it super noisy, that's going to be something that's really important. So, all right, so let's go ahead and move on to the purple plant. And we're just going to create a new layer. We're going to call this purple. Okay, and then let's just go ahead and we can create a black mask on this. And we'll just create a new purpley color. And then let's just go ahead and with the mask selected, we can go ahead and just kind of paint in that purple color. Which I think looks really, really nice. It's really pretty. And we can go ahead and change the stem color. Let's make it a little bit lighter. Yeah, I think something like that should work for us. We could try doing in edges just to get a little bit more color variation in here. So we could probably get the color variation on the purple. So let's duplicate this. And let's go ahead and add a generator. And then we'll go ahead and add a curve. And let's go ahead and change this purple color. Maybe we can make it even more saturated. Maybe a little bit more of a purple like that. And then of course we can just right click on the mask and create a paint layer. And then we can just go through and just kind of paint that purple on the stem out. So, I mean, you can see, like, look how, fast this is, and how effective it is, because it just really doesn't take much to get something on the canvas. So I like that. Now maybe we could tweak some of this purple color a little bit more, make it a little bit more vibrant. Something kind of like this. That might look pretty nice. Yeah, we'll just kind of leave that as it is. And one thing we could also do if we wanted to is we could just slightly go in here. Let's add a paint layer, and we can just kind of go through and just kind of paint where that stem is up here where we can see it. Just kind of subtle. I don't think in the long term it's going to make that much of a difference, but it's something that I'm noticing now, so I want to do it. Okay, and we'll do the same thing on our other layer here. Just kind of go through and paint this out. There we go. I think that's going to make it look a lot better, a little bit more believable. Okay, and lastly, let's go ahead and look at this green plant here. So we're going to kind of do the same treatment we did with this purple flower here. So we're going to go through and we're just going to duplicate this layer, and we can call this green 02, create a black mask. And let's just go ahead and change this green color to something a little different. And with that black mask selected, oh, there we go. Let's just go ahead and paint in on these leaves. You could probably change this color up just a bit more. Let's make it potentially a little bit brighter. There we go. And we'll continue painting that in. Okay, so not too bad. I think the next thing that we can go ahead and do is we can go ahead and just right click on here, and we can add a generator, and we'll add a curvature. That's just going to add more color variation. Okay, and let's go ahead and add maybe a little bit of a different color. Let's add maybe some more of like a aqua kind of color. Maybe something like that could work. And then let's just create another paint layer, and we can just kind of paint out some of that curvature. So we just want the leaves to kind of stick off a little bit better. We don't want it to all blend together necessarily. You know what? Let's just kind of change this color a little bit more. We'll go back into the greens. I think that might help it. Yeah, I think something like that could work. And we'll just tweak our curvature. Just kind of fix some of these sliders. There we go. Okay, so I actually really like that a lot. I'm probably not going to really tweak anything else after this. There is one more thing I want to show you, however, before we get going. Okay, so now let's go ahead and we can start to export these out and take a look. So if you hit Control Shift and E, it'll bring up our export texture settings. Now we do want to go ahead and change the file type from PNG to Targa. 8-bit is fine. We like PBR metallic roughness, that's fine. Now I want to find a place to save this. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and select this folder, and one thing that we can do is we can go ahead and change our export texture size. See, right now this is based on the texture size set, which I believe is 1K by 1K. So let's go ahead and change this to 2K. And let's go ahead and we can go ahead and save that just so it's saved. And then we can go ahead and export. Okay, so now that we are back inside of Photoshop, we can just kind of take a look at what we've done here. The only thing I really care to look at right now is the base color. All right, so now that we have our base color, I just kind of want to show you just a little bit of a trick. And this is something that we could either do inside of Substance Painter or we could do it inside of Photoshop. So I'm going to ask you a question. So have you ever seen a game where you've looked at the foliage and you might have seen like a little tiny white outline behind the leaves or maybe a black outline? Well, the reason for that is because of exactly what you're seeing right here. So because the way that the engine will compress the textures, if you have something like this with the background being a different color than what the actual foliage is, then you're going to see a really small outline of whatever background color that you have in your document. So one way you could do this is you could go into Photoshop here and you could go through with a brush and select the color that is the foliage like this and start to paint around it, which we can't because we just need to select this layer that we have and just delete it, this little like gray background. And let's just go ahead and just fill this background color with a green color, something like this. So if you see something like this, this means that you're pretty much on track. You're going to see a lot of better results. Now you'll probably be okay with this green color for most of the leaves, but if it were me, I would definitely choose to just go around each leaf and just start to paint the color that these leaves are in the background, just like this. So if you ever see textures that look like this, if you're not familiar with it, this is why. They're doing this so that way you won't see any aliasing of a different color. Okay, so we could do this, just kind of paint it up like that, and like the orange color, right? Something just like that. Now, the other option that you could go about doing this is if we go back inside of Substance Painter, we can just create a new layer and stick it at the base. And the only thing we want is the color. So let's just go ahead and take everything else off. And let's go ahead and just select a green color for start. Now, personally, I would choose to do it this way because it's just faster. You don't have to do it manually inside of Photoshop, but that is just an extra way to do it. And let's go ahead and just toggle our color so that's all we see. All right, so that looks kind of familiar. So next, what you could do is you could just create a new paint layer. And if we scroll down here, we'll turn everything off but the color. And we could just start to select all of these colors and just start to do the exact same thing and just kind of paint this up a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and speed this up and do this fairly quickly and just paint all those colors around those leaves. And I'll see you back in just a little bit. All right, so it is not the most prettiest thing. It kind of reminds me of graffiti, but that's okay. It serves a purpose. So let's just go ahead and export this back out again. Okay, now let's go back into Photoshop and we'll just open that back up. All right, so everything looks pretty good now. So let's just go ahead and actually, there is a little issue right here. I do see that this kind of got left over, so I'm just going to kind of paint that out. Okay, so the only thing that we're missing, and this is something we could have set up inside of Painter, and the reason I don't like to do that is because I don't really care to see the alpha channel as we're painting. I just really doesn't matter to me. So what we can do is just let's create our alpha channel and let's put our mask back in. So let's just go ahead and let's open up our mask. This is the one that we got from ZBrush. Let's go ahead and hit Control A and Control C to select that mask, and we'll just paste it into our alpha channel. So now you can see, if I just toggle this on, so we have our original mask, which is perfect. And now we have this sort of graffiti around the edges to prevent any aliasing weirdness. So we can just turn off our mask for now. And let's just go ahead and we'll save this out. And make sure you save it out as a 32-bit. And now we have our foliage complete. Okay, so now that that's completed, let's go ahead and take a look at our pages. All right, so as far as the pages are concerned, I don't think we're going to be needing to use Substance Painter in this case, just because, well, as you can see in the concept over here, these are just very, very simple. Now, if you wanted to, if these were maybe important to the gameplay and you had to read these for whatever reason, then you'd want to spend a little bit more time on them. But I think overall, these are just kind of like symbols and just some like scribbles, maybe like, you know, the person who owns this just sort of like was making notes or about their discoveries, or maybe there's certain spells or, you know, whatever they might be. They're just like something that kind of, you know, adds a little bit of like history to it and a little bit of, you know, just sort of, I guess, a little drama. That's always good. We want a little bit of drama in our work. So I think I'm just going to be sticking to basically just doing some hand painted stuff, and it's going to be very, very loose. I don't really care if this, you know, looks, you know, the best in the world. Again, it's more just like a tertiary element, something that's just kind of fun and whimsical. I will probably end up bringing over, you know, the alpha that we made, if you can recall, for the symbol in ZBrush. So I might just bring that back in just to have some like repeating elements in the scene. But for the rest of the stuff, I'm just kind of gonna just power through and just kind of paint some of the stuff a little bit, and I'll just kind of walk you through one page, and then we can go from there. All right, so let's just go ahead and let's create a new layer. We can sort of work on this big page here first. Okay, so actually first, let's go ahead and just create a base color for all of these pages. And we'll just kind of select this brown color here, and we'll go ahead and just fill that in. This will just kind of be like our rough base start here. And actually we might want to go maybe just a little bit lighter. Maybe something up here. I think that could work. All right, so now that we've got that, let's go ahead and create a new layer. And let's go ahead and just make this a little bit darker. Maybe a little bit more saturated as well. Just try this out. I think that should work for us. Okay, so I just have a chalk brush here, just a simple chalk brush. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start to paint, just kind of dab a little bit and just kind of create a little bit of color variation here. The reason I like the chalk brush is because it's got a little bit of texture to it. Not a whole lot, but you know, it's got enough to make it look kind of nice, kind of dirty. I'm just kind of loosely following what the concept is showing. And we could probably turn our opacity down just a bit, just to help with blending these colors just a little bit better. Okay, now what we can do is let's just kind of grab maybe a little bit more of a saturated orange. And we'll just kind of introduce a little bit of that here and there. We don't need to put it everywhere. And I'm going to grab another square brush here. Still has a little bit of texture to it. So I'm just kind of going through, just selecting where the colors that I've already laid down, just kind of applying them again, just kind of loosely over everything. We could probably do a little bit more saturation and just kind of like lightly add in some lines here. Something like that kind of looks a little cool. So what we could do is do this exact same treatment for the rest of these pages as well. Just going to go through here and just kind of make some friendly marks using a big brush at first. All right, so I kind of like that. It's nice and loose still, which is kind of, I kind of like a more loose style, so I'll just kind of keep it like that for now. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pull in that alpha that we had created earlier. Okay, so now that we have that, let's just go ahead and copy this right on over. All right, there we go. I think that's going to look pretty cool. Let's just go ahead and position this down right about where it is on the page. Doesn't have to be exact, but close enough. Something like that. And then let's just go ahead. What we could do is double click on the layer, open up the layer style, and we'll just do a color overlay. And we could just select, for now, let's just kind of select maybe a darker color here. And we'll just kind of make that just a bit darker so it pops a little bit better. Maybe something like that should work pretty well. Okay, and then what we could do is we could maybe just decrease the opacity just a little bit. Maybe something like that for now. And then what we could do is now, let's just go ahead and select this color. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to call this writing. This will be where we have all of the sort of different writing going on here. And let's grab a brush. Let's grab the hard round brush. Let's go into its settings. And let's turn transfer off. That way that we are getting just fully opaque. That's what we want. And maybe we could just make this just a tiny bit darker. There we go. We just want to be able to read it. Now I'm just going to kind of go through here and just kind of loosely paint out sort of what we can see in the concept. Again, I don't really care if it's perfect. I think, if you do something a little bit, handheld, and it's going to look a little bit better. So even something like this, I think that this is just going to work pretty well for us. I think it looks pretty believable. So I'm just going to kind of move on and we can do some of the rest of the pages. All right, so that didn't take too long, and now you can see that we have some pretty cool looking pages here. I think that these all look pretty cool and unique in their own way. So we can go ahead and save this out, making sure that we have our alpha channel, which we do. So let's go ahead and just save this. Okay, so that'll be called our pages diffuse 01, and we'll make sure we have our 32-bit saved out. Now you're probably wondering, well, what about like the metalness map or the roughness map? Well, with something like this, like you could, and maybe I would encourage you to create your own custom roughness map, but honestly, a lot of the times with stylized stuff, especially given that it's paper, we could actually just use a simple node inside of Unreal to sort of just give us that, that sort of roughness look if we wanted one. All right, so that actually concludes the texturing of our foliage and our pages. So the next time I see you, I will see you inside of Unreal Engine 5.